Hey everybody, and welcome to today's lesson. Our focus is going to be on the chapter called A Nation Declared Independence. This section directly corresponds with Chapter 2, Section 1 in your textbooks. The objectives are as followed. By the end of this lesson, students will find out how Thomas Paine stirred support for independence. You guys will also understand the meaning and structure of the Declaration of Independence. And you will learn how Congress finally agreed to separate from England. The agenda, while it might look different than the one that's on the board, we're going to review the guided notes that you were all supposed to complete for homework, and we're going to complete a graphic organizer. In order to get prepared for this lesson, you're going to need your guided notes template that you were supposed to have completed for homework and a graphic organizer. A hard copy should have been distributed to you at the beginning of class. If you do not have a hard copy, please ask Mrs. Young. And if you decide to do it digitally, please make sure you have your split screen on when that portion of the lesson takes place. Please remember that this is a self-paced flipped lesson. So if you need to pause, rewind, please do so. And I understand sometimes you're going to pause and you're just going to write the information down, but make sure you listen in the event that I tell you to write something down or I'm giving you deeper information about a topic. So the first section in this, the first kind of like unit or subsection in this chapter that we're studying is a call for independence. And in 1776, few colonists could have really imagined what would come next. We have all of these acts that are passed by Parliament and very angry colonists, but, they had no idea what would happen. And so we have kind of two sides. On one side, we have patriots. And patriots were people who pretty much wanted to separate from England. They believed that people have rights that government can't take away, like property and life and liberty. They also thought that taxation took away from property, meaning taxes took away from money and thus hurting people's development of goods or purchasing goods. Colonists didn't believe they had a voice in Parliament, so England shouldn't be able to tax the colonists, and this is where you hear that slogan, no taxation without representation. Patriots also believed there was no way colonies could ever be represented in Parliament because it was so far away, and with that, they should be separate. They also believed that many colonists had fought in the French and Indian War and they had done their part, and this is something that we've talked about so often with that Proclamation Act of 1763, in that the colonists believed they had fought in this war for the British government and for the colonists, and that they had done a due diligence, and that they shouldn't have all of these arbitrary taxes placed on them without representation or without agreement from the colonists and British citizens or British Parliament. Last but not least, patriots believed that the British government were causing violence, riots, and deaths. And when we talk about that, I'm specifically addressing the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, but there were other instances where there was violence, riots, and deaths, but these are the two most famous. On the other side, we have loyalists who believed in a strong, unified British Empire, and they believed that was good for everyone. Colonists that were loyalists believed that British subjects should obey the British law, and that colonists were thus considered British subjects. So regardless whether you did like the law or not, or you felt like you were represented or not, loyalists believed colonists were subject to this rule regardless. Loyal also believed that taxes are due to pay for the French and Indian War, which in the loyalist eyes were fought to protect the colonies, which we've talked about very often in that the British government wanted the land for farming. They felt like the French weren't using it appropriately, and they decided on their own, the British government decided on their own to start moving in to that territory, the Ohio River Valley between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains. Now, that was ignited by the British government again, but when conflict arose, it started to impact the colonies. So in reality, the French and Indian War was fought in some form to protect the colonists, but it was started or ignited by the British government. Loyalists also believed that American colonies would be weak without Britain. They said that the colonies profited from trade with England, which is true. We're going to talk about more moving forward here. And Loyalists also believed that colonies were too far away to ever have a voice in Parliament. So these are the two sides that we have in the colonies. We have these patriots who believed we need to fight for independence, and loyalists who believe we need to stay under British rule. Now this is where your notes come in. The colonies were divided tremendously. As 1776 began, most colonists were neither patriots or loyalists. They were undecided and torn about what to do. Only about 1/3 of the delegates at the Continental Congress actually supported independence. John Adams, who was the second president of the United States, argued that loyalists used the vision of independence as a way to frighten people into giving up, suggesting that independence would cause chaos and violence and that the colonists would never survive on their own. In January of 1776, a 47-page pamphlet hit the streets of Philadelphia. The author was a 38-year-old Thomas Paine, who was a self-educated British Quaker. About 2 years before, Paine had met Benjamin Franklin in London and impressed the colonists with his sharp mind. Franklin had helped Paine come to Philadelphia, where Paine became the editor of the Pennsylvania Magazine. Then, in 1776, Paine produced a work that changed the course of American history forever. In his pamphlet, which is called Common Sense, Thomas Paine argued for breaking away from Great Britain. And when news of his work spread through the 13 colonies, it eventually sold over 500,000 copies. That's going to be something you want to write down. 500,000 copies. Common Sense became popular because of its message and style, and most pamphlets of the time were written by lawyers in a style that only well-educated people could understand. But Paine wrote as a common person speaking to common people, which allowed him to reach a wider audience. Paine stated in Common Sense that the system of monarchy in countries such as Britain was not fair. He said that the people, not kings and queens, should make the laws. He believed essentially that the people were able to govern themselves. And this is a direct quote from him where he says, "A government of our own is our natural right." At a time when monarchs ruled, and remember monarchs are kings and queens, at a time when monarchs ruled most countries of the world, this was a fairly new idea. So what Paine was saying was, you guys should demand for your independence. Paine's Common Sense helped change the way many colonists viewed Britain. With war now underway, the idea of independence gained more and more support. Now, a call for independence, and I hope you guys are able to follow along. I'm not going too fast. The information from your notes is on the slide, so if you're at all confused, please take a moment to come see me. But a call for independence really started in Virginia. Virginia had authorized its delegates to support independence in May of 1776. So this was only shortly after Thomas Paine's Common Sense came out. Richard Henry Lee then introduced the Virginia Resolution. Remember, a resolution is a formal statement of opinion, and that opinion was essentially we should break away from Great Britain. Before voting on Lee's resolution, however, Congress appointed a committee to draw up a statement stating the reasons for separation from Great Britain. Thomas Jefferson from Virginia was given the task of composing the Declaration because he was a brilliant writer. Now, as again, many colonial leaders agreed that with Paine, or Thomas Paine, that the colonies should be free. So in June of 1776, the Second Continental Congress created a committee to write a document declaring the colonies independent. So the committee was made up of 5 members, which we'll talk about later again: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. And Jefferson was the main author of this document. The Declaration of Independence expresses 3 main ideas. And I apologize again, it just says a statement adopted by the Second Continental Congress, meeting in Pennsylvania State House, now known as Independence Hall, in Philadelphia. So this is the Declaration of Independence, which I know it's not on your notes, but you might want to note that it was written at Independence Hall in Pennsylvania. I wanted to take a moment here before we start talking about the structure of the Declaration of Independence to address the difference between the First Continental Congress and the Second Continental Congress. If you have space anywhere on your notes, I would make sure that you jot this down because you will see it again. And you will hear me talk about each of the different Continental Congresses. So the First Continental Congress really met in response to the Intolerable Acts. Remember, those acts were passed as a way to punish the colonists for the Boston Tea Party. The First Continental Congress was called to address grievances against the British government. Now, the Second Continental Congress really met to defend the colonies, and while they were initially called for the same reasons, it was voted to declare independence. But once it was voted to declare independence, it acted as a de facto, which is like informally recognized. So it was an informal government of an independent nation. So the Second Continental Congress was the unofficial independent government of the 13 colonies, or the New Americas. The Declaration of Independence uses a step-by-step logic to explain why colonists wanted to break away from the British rule, and it's broken down into 4 parts. This first part begins with the preamble, or the introduction, to explain why colonists were breaking away from England, or from Britain. The second part is where Jefferson argues that all men possess unalienable rights. He stated these basic rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the writings of an Enlightenment philosopher, John Locke, inspired his ideas. According to John Locke and Jefferson, governments are created in order to protect people's rights, and if the government violates those rights, the people have the right to abolish their government and create another. John Locke's ideas about natural rights included life, liberty, and property. Jefferson built upon those ideas to establish what is known as unalienable rights, or the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I would like to acknowledge that those are 2 different things, unalienable rights and natural rights. John Locke believed that the pursuit of happiness was a foundation of liberty.